How's everyone this morning? So we're continuing with our study of being God's image, women and men in the kingdom of God. And before we get started, I'll just again run through kind of the announcements we've had the last couple of weeks. Biblical study tour to Asia Minor this summer, July 1st through 12th. Looking at how the early church grew and how it negotiated the tension of being in the world but not of the world. Where do we adapt to culture? Where do we resist culture? How do we do that? And how they grew is what we'll be looking at. So if you're interested, my website is steppingintothe.jordan.com. Right now it's on the front page. Click on that and it'll take you to all the info. Here's a direct link that'll be in the videos that gets in the file that gets posted on Wednesday. And then in a couple weeks, couple Saturdays from now, I'll be speaking at SMU at Perkins Summit for Faith and Learning, doing a workshop there. It's a Friday, Saturday event, a lot of good speakers and things. If you're interested, there's a link also in the file to search that, or you can just Google Perkins Summit for Faith and Learning. So today, we're going to look at what is patriarchy. And we do have some seats kind of up here. If anyone wants them, I promise not to spit too much. And we're going to be looking at Genesis 27 is where we're going to be looking as we get into it. A book I want to recommend to you. And I'll probably be using this one for several weeks. It's got some good information in it. It's called The Social World of Ancient Israel. And it's by two scholars, Victor Matthews and Don Benjamin. I just met Victor Matthews a couple of weeks ago at a conference. We were both presenting in the same session, and he presented right before I did, and got a chance to talk to him a little bit before and after. And told him how much I enjoyed this book, and he goes, "Oh, that's an old one. You should see my newer stuff." But anyway, this is a really, really good book. It's a very accessible book. He deals with archaeology and anthropology and other texts that we have to try to uncover what did Israel look like from as the subtitle of the book says, 1250 to 587 BCE. And really there are kind of two structures that work. One is how they functioned as villages, and then as they grew and became cities. And we see different social structures. And it's really just a good book. It talks about a lot of different things, and we'll dive into some of that in the coming weeks. So if you'll recall, when we started this lesson, we looked at a modern definition of patriarchy. And this came from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, that it's a social organization marked by supremacy of the father in the clan or family, the legal dependence of wives and children, and the reckoning of descent and inheritance in the male line. And broadly speaking, it's the control by men of a disproportionately large share of power. That's the definition that we use in our current world. And as we've said before in this study, it shouldn't surprise us that we find patriarchy in the Bible, because it comes out of a very patriarchal world. However, there are plenty of places where the Bible seems to break from patriarchy. And that those are probably the ones that we should pay pretty close attention to. But at the same time, there's another issue that I want us to think about, and that is, does the Bible represent patriarchy according to our modern definition, or does it define it in some other way? And so to do that, we need to look a little bit closer at how the ancient world is structured. And in particular, look at families in the biblical world. So first of all, families in the biblical world are endogamous, which means you only marry within your ethnic group. Okay, and by that I mean generally fairly close family. Clans, people with which you share some degree of kinship. Families in the ancient world were patrilineal, meaning that descent is tracked through the male lineage. That they are patrilocal, which means that the bride moves to the husband's family. Somewhat in contrast with Genesis 1, which says, does anyone recall?
Man will leave his father.
Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. That's not exactly how the ancient world worked. Okay? The bride moves into the husband's family. And they were polygynous, meaning husbands with multiple wives. And on top of that, they're patriarchal, which meant the father is the head of the household. Okay? So, if we look at patriarchy from a biblical perspective, patriarchy is a social system. It requires a certain social order with certain roles and certain structures. And it's important to note that patriarchy is not the same as sexism. And here I think sexism turns into more closer to what we think of in our modern definition, where sexism implies that women are inferior to men. And as we've looked at in previous weeks, when we look at what the traditional view of the church has been, that view has been sexist. Women are inferior to men. And as we've noted in past weeks, that the idea of whether you are a complementarian, meaning that men and women simply have different roles, or whether you're an egalitarian, meaning that men and women are equal and that there's no distinction of roles, that those are both modern views. They are not the traditional view, which is that women are inferior to men. So, now we need to look at, here's your Hebrew lesson for today, the Beit Av, which is Hebrew for the father's household. Okay, Beit or Bayit means house or household. Av means father. It's the Beit Av. And the Beit Av in Hebrew, when we see it as the father's household, really refers to a multi-generational family unit. It's an extended family, typically of 3 to 4 generations. Okay? A patriarch, a grandfather, the sons, their wives, and their kids. And if it's a really big clan and they've been blessed with a good amount of age, another set of wives and kids. And within that structure, the patriarch is the senior male, as defined by the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son, who is the head of the household. It's passed down to the eldest son, and it's for that reason that the oldest son receives a double portion of the inheritance. Why is that? Why does he get a double portion?
So he can support everybody.
So he can support everybody else when he becomes the patriarch. Now, what does this mean if you're not the eldest son?
You're a spare.
Okay, yeah, you're not the heir, you're the spare, as was told to Prince Harry when he was born, right? No joke, it's in his book. That's what his father said. Yeah, you're not the head. Okay?
You're expendable.
You're expendable. To a certain degree, you may take your portion and you may form your own Beit Av, but not necessarily. There's an interesting phrase that shows up in several places in the Old Testament. I know it shows up in the Jephthah story. I've been doing a lot with Jephthah in Judges 11. And in Jephthah, it says that Jephthah became the head of some, and in English we translate it, empty men. Anashim Reiki is the Hebrew. And the question is, what are these empty men? And some think that it's men who, based upon their family structure, are outside of the inheritance structure. Perhaps they're the son of a concubine, or the son of some other relationship to where they don't share in the family inheritance, which is what happens to Jephthah in Judges 11. He's the son of a very strange word in Hebrew is zonah, which sometimes we translate as prostitute. I think it's probably more that he was the son of a non-marital relationship. And as a result, he has no share in the inheritance. And so he becomes this leader of these empty men that are without a sort of Beit Av structure. So, I want to show you a scripture. This is when Moses goes up on Mount Sinai in Exodus. It says, "The Lord descended in the cloud and stood before him there and proclaimed the name, the Lord," or Yahweh. "The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet by no means clearing the guilty, but visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation." So my question is, where do you see patriarchy in this verse?
You don't? I don't.
You don't? Do you see the Beit Av, the father's household, in this verse? Where?
Children and children's children.
Ah, the children and the children's children. So when it talks about visiting the iniquity of the fathers or the parents onto the 3rd and 4th generation, what that's talking about is the Beit Av. Effectively wiping out the Beit Av. So if there's a sin in the household, that whole household goes away. Okay? Visiting on the 3rd and 4th generation. It's not necessarily saying that if you sin, if your grandfather or your great-grandfather sins, that several generations down the line, you're going to have to pay for it. As much as it means when that sin happens within the nation of Israel, in that Beit Av, the whole Beit Av is gone. The whole father's household is wiped out. Okay? As opposed to God's mercy and faithfulness, steadfast love is probably, that term is probably better, covenant loyalty, God keeping his covenant with them to the 1,000th generation, which kind of means forever. Okay. So let's talk about individual rights for a minute. Any questions about that?
Rob,
Yes, sir.
Do you take that translation of parents as being more accurate versus others that talk about the iniquity of the father upon the children?
Yeah, I think, it's literally the father, but I think probably it's the parents. It's probably a better way of looking at it. A lot of times so whenever you have a group, if you have a collective group, okay, let's say fathers, if it's only males, it's fathers, okay, or the same way with brothers, okay, it's only male. If it's a group of only females, it would be mothers or daughters, right? But if it's a mixed group, it goes with the masculine plural. Okay, so a mixed group of people would be fathers. Or it's why oftentimes in the New Testament, some translations have shifted to say, instead of brothers, they say brothers and sisters. Because the plural of brothers really includes a mixed group. And given the context in which the language is happening, that makes more sense. And I think it's the same way here. It's a mixed group. Yes, sir.
This reminds me of radical surgery, cancer surgery, when the doctor goes in and he cuts out beyond the tumor, goes a little bit beyond to make sure he gets it all.
Yeah, that's not a bad analogy. Not a bad analogy. Yes, sir.
But were you saying that the Beit Av is eliminated, like it's done away?
That's
wiped
what
out?
this passage says, that if there's a sin, and we see that. For example, Achan is someone who takes God says, when you go in and take the land and you take this in this certain battle, gather everything and it's devoted to destruction. It's mine. It's not yours. And so Achan keeps some of the stuff for himself. And sure enough, the next battle they lose horribly. And then they start trying to figure out, okay, why did we lose? And God says there's sin in the camp. And I believe they cast lots and they find it's Achan. And I believe they wipe out the whole Beit Av. So it takes everybody in the structure because of the sin. Yes,
So
sir.
when you were at the very first slide you talked about, and I know we're in Exodus, we haven't quite got to the promised land, when the Reubenites, the Simeonites, the Danites, so Danites married Danites, and Simeonites married Simeonites. There was, okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it gets even more specific than that oftentimes.
Okay.
It narrows down. And we're gonna talk a little more about that. I saw another yes, ma'am.
But when you say they're gone, are they just socially kicked out or? No way.
But how could that be? Everyone would be a sinner.
Yeah.
Moses sinned, so why?
Yeah, you have to get to the definition of which sins he's talking about. Okay?
Yeah.
It's covenant violation sins, which more often than not in this context probably means idolatry. Okay? Idolatry or direct, egregious disobedience of specific commandments. It's not just any sin, okay? Because the Old Testament, contrary to what we believe, the Torah in Leviticus, it's very clear, it presumes that you will have sin. And it gives a way for forgiveness of sin, too. Okay? It knows there's going to be sin, and it gives you ways to do it. Sometimes that way is death, but more often than not, it's a sacrifice, and it's a certain kind of sacrifice, and you're good. Yes, sir.
So that's the difference between, it's confusing, the forgiving, he says forgiving iniquity and transgression, and then saying
Yet.
visiting it and wiping out the family, so that they seem kind of opposite.
Yeah, it is. There's a
But your-
tension there.
But your definition that you just said, then makes some sense. That
Yeah,
There's some, it's almost like there's sins that can be forgiven and sins that can't be forgiven.
Yeah, and it's there's another thought that comes in here too, and that is, especially when you read the prophets, okay? The prophets talk a lot about the sin and the punishment for the sin, but they also talk about restoration. Restoration in a big way. And restoration meaning Israel comes back from exile and it's going to be better now. Right? But it still deals with, there's still this issue of disobedience to God can have some pretty dire consequences, not just for you, but for your Beit Av. Okay? Which kind of leads to this next question of individual rights. And, we live in a world that is very individualistic. The ancient world doesn't work that way. The social world of the Bible is communal. Self-identity is secondary to family identity. How are people identified in the Bible oftentimes? So-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so. And occasionally we get so-and-so whose mother was so-and-so. Okay? Identity comes from your Beit Av. And incidentally, life begins at adoption, not at birth. Because in an ancient world where survival of the family on their land is the primary concern, then it may be that a certain child simply cannot be supported by the Beit Av, and that child may not be adopted into the family and may be left to exposure. Because in their view, it's better to lose one than to lose everybody. As harsh as that sounds, it's the way, when you're dealing with a largely pastoral agricultural society, it's the way things work. And survival of the family on their land was everyone's primary concern. And in the Old Testament, this is kind of how they define eternal life. Okay? It's the perpetuation of your family on the land that you were given as part of your inheritance. Okay? So, within that context, what is it that fathers have to do? Especially the patriarch, the head father. His goal is to protect and provide for his land and his children. And in doing so, he is authorized to adopt or excommunicate sons and daughters, recruit workers and warriors, negotiate marriages and covenants, host strangers, and designate heirs. Can you think of any examples where we see these things happening in the Bible? Yes, ma'am?
Excuse me, where Jacob adopts Joseph's two sons as sons.
Oh, yes, he does.
Grandsons.
That's a very good one. Yeah. And who are those two sons?
Manasseh and Ephraim.
Ephraim and Manasseh, and they each get a tribe. There's no tribe of Joseph. Now, incidentally, I think the other thing you see at play there is Joseph kind of gets a double portion of tribes. Okay? He gets two, one for each of his sons. And why is that? He's the oldest son of his favorite of Jacob's favorite wife. Okay, which, by the way, is against the Torah. You're not allowed to do that. But you're not allowed to pick your favorite wife and name her son. It's supposed to be the oldest son. It's supposed to be Reuben. Okay, but really the double portion goes to Joseph.
How about Ruth and Naomi? That's a kind of a different one because he designated an heir in absentia because there really was no heir there, but he said, don't bother Naomi. She's going, Boaz said, don't bother Naomi. She's allowed to glean from
Ruth. To Ruth. Yeah. And that's actually another aspect that comes into play in this is a practice called levirate marriage,
Right.
which is Naomi is without heirs. Okay? Naomi's husband is without heirs, right? So the land that they have, their eternal life is cut off effectively. And so Ruth enters into a levirate marriage with Boaz, okay? And who does it say has a kid? At the end of the book of Ruth, who gets the kid? Naomi. Okay, so there's a continuation of Naomi's line through Ruth and Boaz. Yeah. Oh, yes. Abraham had a whole bunch of kids that end up getting sent out. Now, he gives them something. He doesn't just kick them out, and he kicks one of them out. He kicks Ishmael out, but then he has a whole bunch of other kids later that apparently he gives stuff to. It is curious that if you read the text fairly closely, Ishmael seems to maintain a relationship with Isaac, a pretty close relationship. And in fact, it may be that Isaac's relationship is closer to Ishmael's than it is to Abraham after Abraham tries to kill him. So yeah, we see those sorts of things happening. We see hosting of strangers. Abraham does that. And we're going to look at some designating of heirs in a minute in Genesis 27. But the mothers, especially the primary mother, the matriarch, also has some roles and responsibilities. Her responsibility is to bear children and arrange for other wives to bear children. She is to manage the household by supervising domestic production, rationing, and food production. She is the primary teacher of clan traditions. She mediates domestic conflicts, and she also has a role in designating heirs. So I guess my point is, does this woman have some agency? Yes, she does. And we're going to look at a story where that agency comes on display quite strongly. And it's with Rebecca. In Genesis 26, the ending of chapter 26 that leads us into chapter 27, it says, when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So here's my question. Who's to blame for these marriages?
He's the one that's supposed to be arranging marriages.
Okay, who's supposed to be arranging the marriages?
The father.
Isaac. Why do you arrange marriages?
For continuation, keep it pure,
Worshipping the same God. The Hittites didn't worship.
the bait off,
Say again, Ramona?
to keep the bait off.
To keep the bait off, to form political alliances, to perform economic alliances, to perform or to solidify familial alliances and relationships. What's unique about this? They're Hittites. Now, why is it that Esau might be marrying Hittites?
To get back his father.
To get back at his father? Well, where are they living right now? They're living in Canaan, okay, which at this time seems to have been controlled by a group called the Hittites. So it appears, reading between the lines from this, that Isaac is making alliances with the local people to ensure that his family survives and to ensure that he's got some protection. And so he's marrying Esau to these Hittite women. And how's that turning out? Not very good. All right. So then we jumped into chapter 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called his elder son Esau and said to him, "My son," and he answered, "Here am I." He said, "See, I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt for game. Then prepare for me savory food such as I like, and bring it to me so that I may bless you before I die." Okay? Incidentally, so Isaac and Rebekah have two sons. They're twins, Esau and Jacob. So remember the story of when they were born, what happens? One of them, I think it's a hand sticks out, and so, well, that's the firstborn, so they tie like a little ribbon around it so they know which one it is. The hand goes back in, and then the babies are born, and Esau is the oldest, and it says that he's a hunter and a kind of person of the field, a person of the land, and Jacob is what? Hung out among the tents. Hung out with the women. Okay? There's probably a little bit of innuendo going on there as to this guy's a man's man and this guy's not. Not. Okay? There's suspicion there. Why is he hanging out with the women? Okay? And so, then we see, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, that I may bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my word as I command you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids, so that I may prepare from them savory food for your father, such as he likes, and you shall take it to your father, so that he may bless you before he dies.' But Jacob said to his mother Rebekah, 'Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a man of smooth skin. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will seem to be mocking him and bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. Rebekah says, his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my word and go get them for me. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. And she put skins on the kid of his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. So then she handed the savory food and the bread that she had prepared to her son Jacob. Jacob must be one stupid dude to fall for. I'm sorry, Isaac must be one stupid dude to fall for, hair on the, goat's hair. Anyway, so here's my question: is Rebekah within her rights to do this?
She can designate an error.
She can designate the error.
Why is she doing it so covertly? If she can designate.
She's manipulating what she wants.
Did she see a weakness in the second son?
Or in the oldest son? You mean the oldest son?
No, I think that for her younger son to survive because he didn't have the strength of the older son.
Oh, so she sees. So in your view, she sees Jacob as the weaker, being frail, and therefore she's trying to protect him. Okay.
I think she needs permission. She needs permission.
You think she needs permission to do this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, yeah, she can designate it, but she's not supposed to be in full control.
Interesting. Okay. Any other thoughts?
She had permission.
She had permission?
The Lord said, she went and asked, why are these babies jostling inside of me? And she said, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger.
Okay. So, yeah, this is why we all need to learn Hebrew. This is why we need to learn Hebrew, because the Hebrew is not nearly as clear as we have to write it in English. The Hebrew says the older will serve the younger, but the way it's constructed, it could also mean the younger will serve the older. It's one will serve the other is kind of the way that it's structured. And it's hard for us to put that in English, and we know the story, so we translate it, well, the older will serve the younger. But in reality, when you read it in the Hebrew, what she gets as an answer is a little up in the air. Okay? Like a good oracle, it's a little up in the air. Okay? Well, you don't know exactly what it means, but that is one of the challenges of that passage. Now, she probably interprets it this way, but it's not nearly as clear in the Hebrew as we make it when we read it in the English. It's one of my translation pet peeves. Yes, ma'am?
Go back to the verse you started with, where Esau's wives were causing problems for Isaac and Rebekah. I think she's within her rights because she doesn't want those women to have any background.
Okay. So we see. So yes, ma'am.
She's exerting power over the under in a way.
Okay. Okay. So she's putting power over him. And so here's the thing. What's that?
This is family politics.
There's family politics. If you haven't been to service yet, there's family politics going on here. Yes.
Turning into a matriarchy.
In some ways she is a matriarch, right? She's the top woman. Yes, ma'am, I see another hand back there.
I just think she's being deceitful, and I don't think that can ever be good.
Okay. I'd like you to hold on to that thought for a moment, okay? Because that's certainly a legitimate way to read this, right? To say, what in the world is she doing? Okay, how is she doing this? And I think part of it comes back to, as someone said, when you look at what happened when Isaac is arranging the wives for Esau, he makes some bad choices. And as a result, as I think we'll see what's happening is, Rebekah sees that the Beit Av is at risk. That their survival as a family unit is at risk because of the bad decisions Esau is making about who the wives are.
Yeah, they could be like,
So it's really in some ways it's a dilution of the Beit Av, the family, into the local Canaanite culture. So we're going to skip over the whole scene in the tent. I think we're all familiar with it, about what happens. And we're going to skip to the aftermath because that's what's important. Now, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of her elder son Esau were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger against you turns away, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you back from there. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" And then Rebekah goes to Isaac and says to him, "I am weary of my life because of these Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?" Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, "You shall not marry one of the Canaanite women. Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as a wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and numerous, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, so that you may take possession of the land where you now live as an alien, land that God gave to Abraham." Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother. So, how do you see the Beit Av and the patriarchy getting negotiated here?
Hi, Rebecca.
Okay, but through what means?
Is she making Isaac think it's his idea? Like, she's suggesting to Isaac that, oh, he doesn't need to, like, so he thinks that his son leaving is his choice or his idea versus she already told him to go.
Yeah, she puts the idea into his head, basically, to say, we're done with these Hittite women, right? They're a mess for all of us. You need to do this differently. Okay? Jose, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, just to me, I look at this as, Rebecca is trying to make sure that they're making a wise decision.
Yes, and
you in every family, you're going to have children that are more responsible than another one. Esau was impetuous, makes hasty decisions. She understood that, but she also understood, at least the way I see that, it was going to be, Isaac that needed to, bestow the blessing. That was his role, that was his responsibility. And yes, she did something that was deceitful, but she was making the right choice.
Okay.
Ultimately, that is what God wants.
Yeah. So what is evident in both the situation with Esau's sons and the situation here? Who arranges marriages?
Rebecca.
Isaac is arranging the marriages. Okay? Here, Rebecca goes to him and says, basically, you were making some really stupid decisions with these Hittite women. You can't do it again. Okay? And he's like, okay. And he said, and so he's going to go to your family, and to your trickster brother, and get a wife. It's a thing too. But I think what's important to see here is that she works within that patriarchy structure to say, Isaac, it's your responsibility, but that responsibility means he can't get one from these Hittite women like the stupid decision you made earlier. And her deceit is fully within her rights, because my question is she ever condemned for her actions?
No.
Not a single time. We may call it deceitful, but the reality is she is not blamed for what happens. she's made the right decision. And my question is, how do her actions reflect patriarchy?
Well, this doesn't answer your question, but I think it's interesting that even Esau, seeing, what kind of discord his marrying the Hittite women has caused in the family, that his father sends Jacob, to another land to marry.
Yeah.
Then Esau,
He takes another one.
he goes to Ishmael's line and marries 2 women from Ishmael's
Yes,
line.
yeah. Which again also shows the connection between Isaac and Ishmael, right? That they're considered close family. Yeah. How does it reflect patriarchy?
In that Rebecca is going through Isaac to pick a wife.
Okay, but what about the deceit she does? How does that fit within patriarchy?
That's a different deal.
I think all this is part of her aspect of designating heirs. She's exercising her power and authority that she rightfully has under patriarchy, even as a woman, the agency that she has to ensure the survival of the family. And Rebecca's actions save the household.
Would that still be justified if Isaac wasn't so close to death?
Would it still be justified if Isaac wasn't so close to death?
Because that definitely plays a factor.
I would say, so yeah, the question is how, yes, Jacob should be getting married at some point here pretty soon, and the decisions have to be made. And they should be made ideally before Isaac dies. So yeah, I think his death does play a role, but I think what we're seeing here is she is working within her rights as the mother, the matriarch in this patriarchal Beit Av, to ensure the survival of the Beit Av.
Matchmaker.
Even if that means she has to kind of push Isaac aside a little bit to make it happen the right way. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm just wondering, maybe Rebecca and Laban, since they were brought up in the same home, they were both deceitful.
Yeah, so it's something. Yeah.
It may not. It was a learned behavior instead of a spur of the moment. Oh, wait, we got to do something.
Okay, that's a really interesting observation. Yeah, because it's interesting when Jacob goes to Laban and he kind of recounts all that's happened. Does anyone know what Laban says to him? He says basically, I can see that you and I are cut from the same cloth. Okay? And guess what? That plays out in the story, right? Because Laban tricks Jacob, Jacob tricks Laban. I mean, there's all sorts of deceit going on. So in some sense, I think you're right. Rebecca may not have fallen too far from that tree either. But I think what's important to recognize is she's never criticized for what she does. Okay? She takes agency for herself and for her family to ensure the survival of that family. Okay? And I think she's fully within her rights within patriarchy as we see it in the Bible. Now, by our modern definition of patriarchy, we would say she overstepped her bounds. And that's where I think the difference is. Women have certain roles and responsibilities, even within biblical patriarchy, that we may not assign today, that give them agency and authority to do things as it relates to survival of the household and survival of the people.
How would her authority have changed once he died?
So when he dies, then who becomes the patriarch? Well, now in this case, it's Jacob, right? And so Jacob is the patriarch, and she's a widow. Okay, and we'll talk about widows. Widows have an excessive amount of power, probably more power than a lot of men have in society, and we'll talk about that in coming weeks. One more, yeah, a quick one.
I guess there's again the preservation of family but they are the only faith of God Yahweh at this time. And so the dissolving of Esau with these foreign women serving other gods at the time has to be, not that she's praised for that, but that's God's agency.
Yeah, certainly God's hand is in this. I'm not saying that's not happening. I'm simply saying that her actions also reflect her agency within a patriarchal structure. And I think that's important for us to realize. So in quick summary, patriarchy in the Bible really kind of follows some different rules from our modern view of patriarchy, and we'll see some more of those as we go through. The social world of the Bible is communal. Individual rights are of little importance. It's really all about survival of the family. And especially the matriarch, the wife of the patriarch, the lead wife of the patriarch, plays a vital role in the leadership of that household, even more so than younger men. Okay? And Rebecca is an example of a woman who steps up and steps into her role to protect the survival of her household. And her actions are not condemned. I think that's a really important thing for us to consider. And so next week, we're going to jump forward a little bit, and we're going to look at Deborah the chieftain. So read Judges 4 and 5. You get the account two ways. You get it once in narrative and once in song. And so we'll look at those next week and examine how she functions as a judge, as a chieftain in Israel. Thank you all very much for the discussion, the comments, and we'll see you all next week.